is Laura Worley, and I'd like to welcome you to the Worldwide Transformational Summit, where we have Teal Swan on today with our lovely interview that we are so grateful to have you show up for us at our Worldwide Transformational Summit. I was going to read you a bio about you, and because I forgot my notes, I guess I am going to tell a little bit about you and let you do the rest.
This is a test.
This is a test. You're a speaker, teacher, and author, and you speak and teach all over the world. And you teach on a very important product that I would like to share are the 3 books I'd like to really talk about today that you have authored. And I'd like you to also talk about the trauma and the things that you're covering with your surviving ritual abuse and abuse. And so that's really why we're excited to have you on, because we feel like it's an important topic that a lot of people don't discuss. So would you tell us a little bit about your history and how you really got started in all this?
Oh, okay. I got started in this actually by virtue of how I was born. Some kids are born super sensitive. We call them extrasensories. I was born one of those children. So not just interacting with this physical dimension, interacting with many more dimensional realities within this universe. And it was not really taken very well, because, I mean, more people know about it now than before, but it's still very fringe. So being born a child like that to parents that didn't know about any of that stuff and weren't really religious per se, weren't really spiritual, they didn't really know what to make of me. So I wasn't received very well. And the people in my childhood saw what I was seeing and what I was doing as disordered. Instead of it being an ability, it was a disability. There's something wrong with this kid. So they were taking me around from expert to expert, trying to figure out how to fix me, basically. And it created a real rift or a gap between me and my parents especially. Because what you want so bad is acceptance, and your parents, as parents, you're doing the best you can for your kid, but the message that you're giving, because you're dragging them around trying to figure out what's wrong with them, is something's wrong with this kid, which is inherently distancing. So there was like a gap, basically, is the best way to put it, between me and my parents growing up. And unfortunately, my parents decided to raise me in an incredibly religious area, a religious rural area. You know how bad that can get sometimes? And I got on their radar. And they decided that it was their job to rid the earth of evil. So one of these members of the town, who was part of these groups, decided to infiltrate the family as a mentor to me. So he came into a family, basically my parents, that were desperate to try to figure out how to help me and what to do with me, saying, I know what to do with her. However, it was completely the opposite of what he sold himself as. It was that he planned to basically cart me around, turn me into his prodigy, work me straight into the group, into the cult. And for 13 years I was ruthlessly traumatized and tortured by this man, who my parents trusted with me. And I escaped at age 19.
So how did you escape?
I literally got in my car and drove away. It was basically running. But the kind of mind control that operates in these types of cults, it's difficult for people to understand, because you're not under shackles. The shackles are internal. Mm-hmm. Which is why when you escape, the breaking free process, even though physically you may have taken off, internally is years and years and years and years and years of trying to break free of the mentality that has you stuck there. The mentality of, there is something wrong with me and these are the only people who are going to love me. The mentality of, I don't belong anywhere, I only belong with them. Or I can't make relationships work, the only relationships I can make work are with them. It's very standard for a cult to use these types of methodologies, even when they don't use deliberate mind programming, which the cult that I was with did.
So this was a man who basically just took you in and started to use the mind control type things, the programming with you, and then.
Oh yeah.
And then you were too scared to tell, or how?
No, they set it up very nicely so you don't tell. So they give you an excuse as to why they're in your life. His excuse was, I'm your real father. Not only am I your real father, your body's been taken over by a demon, and the other demons are basically trying to chase you to take you back. And I'm the only way you're going to stay safe from that. So it's multi-layered, right? Mm-hmm. The next excuse was, if you say anything to anybody, I'm going to kill every member of your family. And it's not just said, because I mean, it's powerful for a child, for an adult to say, okay, I'm going to say this to you, but they actually back it up. There's no reason to disbelieve them, because they kill animals in front of you. They kill other children in front of you. And you're watching that. So when they walk you through visualizations, which they do under the use of drugs like ketamine, they will walk you through visualizations of watching it happen. Do you see your mother skinned alive? Do you see your father disemboweled? This is what's going to happen if you say one word. So now I become responsible for keeping my family safe by virtue of staying silent.
Okay.
And oftentimes when they kill children, even if it's a sacrifice that they're performing for the sake of some other ritual, they will go ahead and tell the children that are being in the process of being programmed into the group that child talked.
Now, is this a group that is like worshiping Satan, or?
There are several. So this is, I hate to break it to people in the universe here, but there are several different groups which are all feeding into a larger cult. It's a much more powerful cult. But you've got satanic groups, Christian groups, and other groups that are just looking to benefit and get kickbacks, typical social hierarchy, by virtue of feeding into this main group.
Okay, and the military and that kind of thing
Yes.
is all involved in that.
All of it.
Yep. Right.
And there's different sections. So like you'll see there's like a media segment where some people are born into or brought into that area. You've got the military aspect. You've got, let's see what else. You've got a political faction, and you've got the religious faction, which is where I was brought in. By virtue of my gifts, they believed that I was this oracle, and the oracle was basically designed to grow up into this role that they call the Pythia. And so I would have been within the religious side of this group, and their goal, of course, was to be able to hand me up to the very, very top after training me well enough.
Okay. And so how long have you like been on the road of healing yourself since then?
Since the minute I got away.
Okay.
I mean, I was on that road even before.
Okay.
Because I was miserable. I was miserable, and that was my life, but I was always trying to figure out a way to get better.
Were you consciously aware of that 13 through 19?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so you were. All right.
I had to be, because there's different roles within these cult groups. And they call it the light or the dark side. The dark side of the cult group is participating but doesn't know. They've got a hell of a lot more programming towards them that is done to suppress things into the subconscious so that they can genuinely live a double life. But what happens is, you'll usually create a double life for a child, but if they're in a role like I was, where they're going to flip to the light side, meaning that they're going to be in charge of also knowing what's going on within the group, at that point they actually take down the barrier between the aspects of self, the fractured personality aspects that are living the double life. And they have to do that because there's no way, I mean, they don't want the liability of somebody flipping back and forth between I know and I don't know when they're in charge of the group.
Okay.
It's a really difficult transition. Many don't make it, honestly.
Yeah, and you are kind of more of an older child that's usually taken in.
Oh yeah.
So that's
yeah.
also probably allowed you to be free.
Yeah, and I think that they considered it liability, and when I was going through a lot of the abuse, the cult trainer who was in charge of actually programming for this group was always talking about the fact that they had to do 4 times, 5 times more with me because of the fact that I had so much interaction with the real world, as opposed to my whole family being part of this group. And also, so much more programming because of the age at which I was brought in. Much easier for them when they bring in infants, which they do.
Okay. So tell us about your book, because this probably started you writing books and helping people all over the world.
Yeah, writing was always my only escape. So I've been writing my whole life, and it was, I don't know how many years now, I can't do math. It was X amount of years after I got away, and at that point, my self-esteem was in the gutter. I was literally like, I'm never going to be okay. I just literally can't function here. And that's why people have such a poor success rate getting free from ritual trauma. Because they make it, intentionally, impossible for you to get away. Because you can't function. So basically, I was in that non-functional space, feeling like crap about myself, trying to figure out anything that I could do, because I had no life skills, really. And what really blew my mind is that people didn't know the kind of stuff that, as an extrasensory, I know about the universe. It's very easy. See, everybody's got their strengths and weaknesses, right?
Right.
If you talk to somebody who's a good organizer and you're a bad organizer, it's kind of like, I don't understand how you're even doing that right now. That's how I feel about a lot of the aspects of physical living. But when it comes to this multidimensional universe, it's like, I take it for granted. So when I was talking to people, because I opened the door just a teeny little crack after my son was born to seeing people one-on-one again with some of these gifts that I have. And when I saw the difference that I could make just by virtue of telling them something that, from my perspective, is completely obvious about the universe, I started to have this feeling, maybe for the first time, I do have a place here. Maybe I'm not destined for destruction, maybe there's a bigger reason why I went through this. And I wanted to get this information out to people that couldn't afford a one-on-one session. So it's like, I'm not an idiot. I'm driving around the streets. I understand that there are people who really need this stuff, who are suffering bad enough that they can't afford a $100 workshop or, $200 in-person session. And so I was like, okay, how could I get this to them? 2 ways. I could write a book thinking about people who are homeless. Those books, if they're carried by libraries, they can go check them out. And libraries, you can have access to internet, so internet and books. So I wrote my first book, and it became a big success.
Now that is the, is it the sky?
The Sculpture in the Sky.
The Sculpture in the Sky. Sorry about my notes, okay. So tell us a little bit about that first book, because I want to talk about all three.
Okay, so The Sculpture in the Sky was an informative guide to the universe. I wanted to answer the big questions for people. Why are we here? What is the purpose of life? How does happiness or your emotional guidance system play into the role of happiness and purpose, and why the universe was created in the first place, and then how to achieve it?
Okay, and I did see some things on you talking to people about happiness, and you said don't get into the happiness trap.
Yeah.
What does that mean?
Well, if you're chasing happiness, you're usually doing it by virtue, because you're resisting something that feels bad. Now, we understand in the universe that is inclusion-based. Anytime you are resisting something, that's actually what you're feeding your energy towards. So if you're resisting unhappiness, and that's what happiness is really about, then you get more unhappiness. So for people, I like to, it's sort of philosophical. Follow your emotional guidance system, go in the direction of happiness is philosophical, because for most people they can't distinguish between when they're genuinely following joy or when they are in a state of resistance towards what doesn't feel good. So for the majority of people, it's better to say, look, drop the idea of happiness. Like, literally give up on it today and think about relief instead. So it's what thought can I think, what thing can I say, what action can I take that gives me a tiny bit of relief today. And that's what most people have access to. But chasing happiness becomes a tool of the ego, the human ego. It says, my identity and the way that other people see me, which feeds identity, is dependent entirely upon me being happy. Mm-hmm. And I expect myself to be happy even when my mother dies, and when my job is collapsing, and when, somebody's dropping atom bombs, and it's completely impractical. So, I think the frustration for me in my position as a spiritual teacher is that you've got a lot of these concepts that work. Follow your joy works. In certain scenarios, positive focus works. But there are very subtle nuances when it comes to a vibrational reality like we live in. Very subtle nuances that apply to focus that if it's not understood, these same tools, which are highly beneficial in some scenarios, actually dig you deeper.
Okay. Explain that a little bit. How's it going to dig you deeper?
Okay, so for example, let's say that you are a person who has super low self-esteem.
Okay.
You don't really actually love yourself. In fact, there's a whole bunch of stuff you can't stand about yourself. You may be conscious of this or you may not. If you sit down and you do a positive focus exercise or an affirmation session where you write, I love myself, 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 what you're going to notice is that emotionally you start feeling worse, 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 heavier, 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 because internally you're going to register that as a lie. So not only are you lying to yourself, you're feeling crappy about yourself, even worse about yourself, because you can't feel that way. It's because you're asking yourself to bridge a gap that is just too wide between where you are and where you want to be. Where you want to be is I love myself, where you are is I freaking hate myself. So saying, oh, I love myself is like you gotta jump the Grand Canyon. It's not gonna happen that way. So that's one of those nuances. We would be, if you wanted to be in the process of positive focus, we would be helping you find a thought that is much more accessible vibrationally than I love myself.
Okay.
Something you could believe.
That makes sense. So you do talk a lot about it's important to have self-love.
Yeah.
Because if you don't have self-love, I know it's a process to get there,
Oh, yeah.
but if you don't have self-love,
Oh, Lord, yeah.
then what's, because a lot of people don't.
Yeah, most people don't.
Yeah.
Because we're actually taught to hate ourselves, if you want to know the honest truth.
Mm-hmm.
It's really painful for me to watch human society, because the reality is, the good person is the one that hates himself the most. Until the point at which your self-hate becomes dysfunctional, then we lock you up and call you crazy. So, yeah, I mean, like, you're not a good person if you have a high estimation of yourself, and this is what drives me nuts, is the mixed messages. I mean, I have to deal with adults who are in a state of fragmentation. Why? Because the society they're born into says, hate yourself, no, love yourself. It's dysfunctional. It's got to change. And self-love is not easy. Like, I'm just going to be honest with you. It is not easy, and it is a lifelong process. Because if you understand the concept of oneness, we are the same as everything in this universe. So actually, if there's somebody in the universe you don't love, something in the universe you don't love, that's actually self-hate.
That's true. You don't want to admit that, but that's true.
Nobody wants to.
You're always one except for that person.
Yeah.
So.
But that becomes like, I mean, there's different layers. We could go surfacey with how to love yourself. We could go deeper, deeper, deeper. But when we go to the deepest level of a spiritual dimension, until you can love war, you don't love yourself. And love is to take something as yourself. It's not, oh, I approve positively of this. It's to take it as yourself. So it's not until the moment that you can see that enemy as you, as something that is reflecting as you, that you're practicing love and self-love.
I like that. That's very good. Well, what about, you were saying something about the opposite of love is not hate.
Yeah.
It is
Fear.
Yeah.
So to love something is to take it as yourself. It's just very simply the energy of pulling it into as part of you. If you feel the sensation of love, which is usually preceded by appreciative focus. So when I look at you and I say, oh, I love those blue eyes, I get a sensation of pulling closer to you. It's a fusion. When I say, I'm afraid of that, it is the exact opposite. It's a distancing. It's an isolation. That's why fear in and of itself and the extreme pain that is caused by fear is so inherently isolating. It causes me to live in a world where I am separate from everything around me. I have to be separate from everything around me. Because obviously I only fear something when I think it doesn't have my best interest at heart. And if it is me, how can that be the case? So it must not be me.
You're going. That's a deep one. Okay, so, because everybody has fear, right? And we all have our fears whether we want to admit it or not.
Oh, yeah.
And they do control us. They stop us from having a good life and for having good relationships with ourselves too, because we're so afraid to do it. All right, so let's go into the next book.
But can we talk about fear for 10 seconds?
Oh, yes, I love it.
It is true that every one of us has fear. And my issue with our attitude towards fear is that there's a great many teachers who approach fear from the angle of it's the greatest enemy. Fear is the tool of the ego, and the ego is the reason you can't be happy and the reason that you feel bad, and so it becomes yet another thing to fear and hate. So the way that we need to be approaching our fears is by loving our fears. And how do you love your fears? Very simply, you treat your fear as if it's a crying child, because it is no different.
Okay.
So if I'm desperately terrified of getting close to this person, I come in and love that fear. By saying, how would you treat a child? I completely understand that you're here. I'm going to meet your needs. I'm going to help you feel better. I'm going to soothe you. That's the type of attitude we need to be taking towards our fears. Not like I'm going to push through them, or I'm going to run away from them, or I'm going to tell myself they're ridiculous, or fill in the blank. So that's radical self-love, you see.
I like that. And it makes it, it really does matter if you start to do that with yourself.
Oh, yeah.
Because if you've been traumatized, you have a lot of fear.
And valid fear.
Just in that self.
Yes, and valid fear.
And valid fear.
And I want to say valid fear about 100 times over. Because the reality is that we live, especially in the spiritual field, we are in the business of saying that fear is an illusion and it's not real. No, you don't end up there by chance. You end up there because you've had negative experience, and that has to be honored.
So what would you say to somebody who has had a lot of trauma? If they may have your background, they may not, but they've had a lot of trauma. So what would you say about that?
Treat yourself as gently as possible. It's the missing experience. We need to experience the missing experience in our lives. Most people who have gone through trauma, they are lacking gentleness, they are lacking connection, they are lacking security. Those are the types of things they need.
And is there like a lot of anxiety that it seems like people with trauma, and it could be a lot of different reasons, but anxiety seems like to be such a huge one for people who've been through a lot of trauma.
Yes, but I can explain this really quick if you want to know why.
Oh, I would love it.
Okay, anxiety is the byproduct of self-hate.
Okay.
What it is that I'm in a situation where I'm being treated badly. And the only way that I could take responsibility, feel powerful enough, was to take complete responsibility for why that was happening to me. I'm going to do that by going into shame. It's my fault. Now, one of the reasons that it's so incredibly difficult to get people who have survived abuse out of it's my fault is because that's the only control they ever had. It's my fault is the only thing that makes me not a victim. It means I can do something about it. But it comes with a seriously heavy side dish. And that's that if it's my fault, I did something wrong and bad. And we have an internal moderator, all people do who are socialized. The internal moderator takes the place of the parents internally and says, I'm going to keep you in line. It's the voice that says, why the hell did you do that? Why did you mess up so bad? And basically punishes you. So as somebody who's been abused, you live with an abusive internal moderator. And it creates a sensation of doom constantly because you are living with the enemy.
Okay.
The people who don't have anxiety love themselves. They have a high self-concept. They don't feel like internally there's a big rift between the aspect of them that is hating them and wants to get out of them but can't, and the aspect that's traumatized and is trying to do good but can't.
So what would you say to people, like I would like to share that I was debating whether to even share that, but I thought, you know what, it's probably time that I do it, is I also have a similar history that you do. And I don't talk about it a lot because of I think the fear of the repercussions of sharing.
Yep.
And not only that, but there's a lot of judgment
Oh,
from other people if you share certain things that aren't like talked about in society. So I am really grateful that you're sharing because I think it's an important thing because, you know, I have to say this, and this is a fact, is this isn't just a couple people. This is millions of people all over the world that are suffering in this kind of thing with ritual abuse and programming and that kind of thing. And so, anyway. Well, now this is going to be kind of a weird go to the next subject here, but...
yeah, everyone's like, wait, what?
Okay, so I want to talk about your book, the second one or the third one, whichever you think would go along with the next part of this. The Dawn...
Well, the second one, because we're already sort of on that train.
Okay.
Okay, the second one, Shadows Before Dawn, right? Yes, Shadows Before Dawn was all about self-love. Because, to be honest, every time I was trying to heal, I would go to a person, a therapist, a friend, whatever, and they always had the same answer for me, which was, you need to learn to love yourself. And it's pretty much the worst thing you could say to somebody who's suffering, who hates themselves, because what does that mean? It is so abstract. It's the same as, just let go. Okay, thanks. Well, if I could have done that, I would have looked for a red button somewhere and never found one. So basically, I was like, I'm sick of this. Like, I'm really sick of this. Like, really, really sick of it. So I have to find an answer. Like, this has got to be, it can't just be like, oh, you have to love yourself. How do you do it? Mm-hmm. So what I did is I studied people who love themselves. It was awful. It was so awful. Oh my gosh, like, being a person who hates yourself, being around people who love themselves is torture. Because it's so annoying that they can have this attitude towards themselves and treat themselves the way they do. And you're kind of like looking at them like they're evil, but somehow they're so much happier and nicer and everyone likes them more. So, yeah, that was my rant about how awful that process was. But I watched them and I noticed that there's some very identifiable key features to them versus people who don't like themselves. And one of those, for example, was that they choose how they feel over anything. It was like in bizarre scenarios, and I was thinking to begin with, this is not going to work out for them. Like, if you don't do what you have to do, even if you don't want to do it, you're screwed. Hell no. Time and time again, it's proven to me by virtue of watching them that when they make decisions in favor of what feels good, it just works out for them. I'm like, what the hell is this? That made no sense to me at all. But So somebody who hates themselves, they'll be in a situation where it's like, okay, I need to win somebody's approval, and this is not going to come easy because I'm a horrible person innately, so I'm going to do whatever I can do and really be resentful of it, that I'm doing this thing that I don't want to do. And it sets you up, because people can't stand you when you've got that energy. But like, these people would be like, you know what, it doesn't feel good, so I'm not going. And I was like, okay, so I identified several of these key behaviors. And I was like, all right, so you can't just love yourself. But what if you started doing these behaviors? What if you started replicating the behaviors? Could replicating the behaviors actually cause the emotional sensation of caring about yourself? So I made myself a guinea pig, and I made a few other people in my life a guinea pig, and it was a very, very good result. It was basically that, yes, by duplicating these behaviors, and by dealing with what comes up as a result of it, you absolutely can create a sensation of caring about yourself. So yeah, that was book 2.
And that seems like that's what, you seem like you do care about yourself and you love yourself.
It depends.
Yeah, well that's probably normal.
I do, I mean, a lot more than where I was. But I mean, one of the things I'm the most dedicated to in the world is basically authenticity with where I am. If I sit in this chair today and I sell you on the idea, which would be wonderful because it sells more books, sell you on the idea that I completely am in a space of self-love and everything, it does no justice to the reality of the recovery process from abuse. Okay. And it does no justice for people, for me to be in a state where I'm lying. The reality is that I, like everyone else, go through dips, valleys and peaks in terms of self-love. Sometimes I'm like, oh my gosh, I've done it. I've completely conquered. I feel amazing. I feel so confident, and I really like myself, and I'm treating myself well, and then one thing will happen in my life, and just like everyone else, I'm like back to those behaviors.
That's probably just called normal human being.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It is, and so it's like part of what I'm really starting to talk about. Because what I'm watching is that it becomes a self-perpetuating cycle of abuse. Self-abuse. It becomes the relapse cycle, where it's like something causes you to relapse into the behavior, whether it's self-hate or something else. And then because you've relapsed, that becomes another reason to hate yourself. And it's like a spiral from hell. So it's very important for me to be in a position where I normalize that for people. So that not only, so that they get, this is okay. To have a relapse is okay.
And I like that you're honest, because a lot of leaders in the world that are out there healing aren't as honest sometimes, that everything is fantastic all the time, and that's just not possible because we are a human being. So thank you for sharing that part. So if you were to give any kind of what are you laughing about?
No, it's so true. I don't know. It's true, and it's really the bane of my existence in this field. I cannot stand how often I see people who are in my position. I understand them, because trust me, I get enough flack for being honest to sink a ship, but it drives me crazy when I see people who are in a state where, behind closed doors, to me, they're confessing that their marriage is ending, and it's like, I just don't know if I can even get on stage today, and they get on there like, my life is awesome. Buy my book, and I'm like, oh God. Like, this is why we hate ourselves. That's why we hate ourselves.
Yeah, because you think, oh, you'll get to this stage where everything's perfect all the time. And that's not reality either.
No.
I mean, no matter who you are, I don't care who you are. It's not ever going to happen because you are a human being. But if you were somebody that has your history, my history, what would you tell them to give them some hope? Because, that's the one thing that's always taken away, is hope.
Okay, what would I tell them? What would I tell myself? I would tell them, I think, that what you went through has made you capable of connecting with human beings on a level that most people will never reach. Now, I know that it's hard for people to understand that, because when you've been abused, like I said, you're in a state of fear, and so you're feeling isolated. Mm-hmm. But the reality is that the distance between people is what's causing the issues on this planet. It is that incapacity to feel compassion, the incapacity to really connect with other people's pain that causes that. And it's why people are in so much pain around the world. So what I notice over and over again with survivors is that they have this depth of emotional connection. And if they could understand where that can go, the levels of intimacy that you can get to that you would never have dreamed of. Most people who are in just an average relationship never, ever reach that level of intimacy and connection. So it's almost like, by virtue of going to the extremes this way of all the horrible things you can experience, it's almost like you give birth to the other side of potential.
Mm-hmm.
You can experience that much safety because here's the principle in the universe. You can't understand white unless you know black. So it's almost like to the degree that you go black, you can understand the opposite degree of white. And that is something that's available to your consciousness, where it wouldn't even be a question in the mind of someone who hasn't experienced those levels of darkness.
I do think that is true because a lot of people that have been through a lot of trauma seem to have a lot of gifts
Oh, yeah.
on the other side.
Yeah.
If they choose to use them. Not everybody chooses that. But if they choose, the gifts are amazing.
Yeah.
And the love and compassion, like you said, for other people is like, I don't think you would ever understand that if you didn't go through that. You know, there was something that always in me, and I know it's a gift, there was just this thought, there's always a way, there's always a way to get through, there's got to be a different way. No, I cannot accept that. So that's how I live my life. Now, it can be annoying to my husband at times, but there's always got to be a way.
Yeah.
So that's what I feel like he gave me.
Really?
Yeah. Like there's got to be a way, this cannot be it. So that's kind of how I got through a lot of stuff.
That's cool.
Yeah.
That's really good.
So tell us about your third book.
Okay, this is my little favorite. Okay, so my third book, The Completion Process. Part of me trying to heal from my trauma was realizing that nobody had an answer for me. And I would love to sugarcoat it, but that's the reality. It got to the point where, trying to heal from all the trauma that I went through, I hit a dead end. It didn't matter what psychologist I went to, we would have that talk where they would sit down with me and say, darling, you've had developmental trauma. Trauma that is so severe that it has altered the way your brain is wired. You are going to look at a life that's going to look a certain way. You're probably never going to have a day where you don't have dissociative seizures. You're going to have issues in relationships probably for the rest of your life. You're going to have to live life a certain way. It's kind of like the talk that, it's like on a mental and emotional level, is the talk
It's like, and they're supposed to be helping, right?
Yeah. But it's this kind of talk that you'd get if you were paraplegic. Mm-hmm. You're not going to walk again. So, I didn't accept it, to be honest. Like, I would not swallow it. I was like, I'm not living this way. It's not happening. So, it was really disconcerting and put me into a super hopeless space that nobody had an answer, and that's why they kept saying that to me. Because they didn't want to own the shame. They didn't want to say, look, none of us know what to do.
Exactly, that was the answer.
Yeah, the answer is none of us know what to do. But they didn't want to say that because it makes them feel inadequate. So It was scary to realize how damn alone I was.
Yeah.
And I realized that the answers were going to have to come from me. It was going to have to be researching, using my abilities, looking at things on a multidimensional level, not just a physical level, and kind of incorporating all of them. And through doing a lot of that, I actually created this process. It's sort of an amalgamation of things that I ran into and universal principles, which I can understand. And I put this process together, which is designed to cure post-traumatic stress disorder.
Awesome.
But here's where it gets really fun. So when people say, tell me what completion process does, my answer is everything. Because if you look at somebody who's got an illness, cancer, whatever, it's also the byproduct of trauma. So we got to look at people as if they're in a state of health when they come here. And when they meet with trauma is when the purity, let's say, of the expression of their source consciousness becomes altered. And that's when we start to see dysfunction of any kind, whether it is emotional, mental, or physical. So I look at trauma as the root of why anybody's in the condition that they're in today. So I don't look at any condition in terms of it can't be solved by this process. It's just that because it deals with trauma directly, it does such good work for PTSD that it's kind of amazing, you know.
That's awesome. Okay, so anything else about the book? You said it was your favorite. Why's your favorite?
Because I'm so passionate about this work, it is unbelievable. Because in my life, I'm kind of an upstart. I don't know if you guys have noticed already, but those of you who know me already know this. I have a very, very, very hard time keeping my mouth shut when I know that there are things in this world that are being done incorrectly, in a way that damages people. And what I am often confronted with in this field is that we're doing things in a way that compounds trauma.
Okay.
And so when I get the opportunity to be like, look guys, look, no, there's a reason this isn't working, I can actually tell you what that reason is, I can tell you what's going to work instead and why, I get real jazzed. Because I know the impact that that's going to have. And I know that if we, especially as people, one of the key components of this process is shifting our attitude towards the emotions that we feel. We have to change how we deal with them when they come up. And there's this very specific way we've got to deal with them. And it doesn't matter who you are, it doesn't matter what you've been through. This is like the emotional wake-up call for humanity. And so when I'm walking the streets, watching this, let's say, level of unconsciousness relative to emotions specifically, compounded on the streets, no matter what relationship it is, I am like, I have to talk. I have to be talking. I have to be talking so that this never happens again. I can't have that happen again. So, I mean, call it personal vendetta because I understand pain so much that, people who are trying to heal the wound that they see in themselves, I'm no exception. I need this world to change in the way that it relates to emotions because my life was destroyed by it. And I feel like that can have a shadow. It can be like, okay, you're just trying to heal this external wound because it's a wound that's in you. Or that can be the very reason you were inflicted with it. Because maybe you were the one that was meant to say, look, we gotta stop doing this to each other.
I agree. Because you know what? I think what happens to us, if we let it, can turn into our good, and if we stand up and do something about it. And that's what I really feel in this area specifically. I would like to just say that, with trauma and with ritual abuse and that kind of abuse, it really does need to be talked about because this isn't just, a few people are having this happen. And so many people are scared to death to say too much about it because of the repercussions of talking about it. There's a lot of people that don't want you to talk about it. I'm sure.
I know.
A lot of people.
I know.
And so that stops a lot of people from saying anything.
Yeah, it almost stopped me. I mean, I'm more aware of than anybody probably about the risk of talking about this kind of stuff. But I'm also ballsy. And there was a moment that I had like a realization after hiding. I mean, it did go into hiding. When I escaped, I was like, I don't want anything to do with this. I'm scared to death. In fact, I'm going to get an ID where it's a police office. Like, I want no one to know where I am. Yeah. And then I was like, okay. I'm basically living exactly the same regardless of whether I'm public or not. Because the enemy is not out there. It's not whether they put me in a vehicle and drive me off or kidnap me or do whatever. It's already happened. It's not about that. It's that I'm living as if it's happening every day.
Yeah. So
there came a point where I was like, screw it. If they're going to take me out, it's better than living in fear.
That's
I'm
right.
hiding either way. So.
And you're doing a lot of good to help people.
Yeah.
I like that attitude. I like your ballsy. So that's good. Okay, so I'd like to ask you, people that have been through trauma, do you find that they recreate that when they grow up in a new situation of their own, like through relationships and?
Yes, I find that quite often. And technically, because it is your mind, your vibrational set point that is creating reality, we could call it creation. But I find that when we even put it in that frame, that you created it, that it inherently implies that there's some sort of intention behind doing that, when that process is highly subconscious. So the first thing to understand is, if you're in that pattern of repetition of the childhood relationships, meaning I keep getting in the same abusive types of relationships, I keep ending up with the same type of guy or girl, this keeps happening to me, it isn't your fault. And it's not intentional, and you are sure as hell not doing it because you're choosing it. What's happening there is that the trauma itself, the original trauma, is unresolved. So there's a real benevolent reason, universally, we're talking at the highest level, there's a benevolent reason why these patterns are repeated. It's because the universe is in favor of expansion. That means going to the new place and the new thought. Now, it can only go to the new thought when there is a new thought. So obviously, there can only be a new thought once there's a resolution, right? Otherwise, we're still repeating the same thought. So what the universe is doing, basically, is trying to create resolution by bringing the same experience back, hoping for another result.
Okay.
So I mean, it's kind of funny, because ironically, it usually backfires, you don't get the same result. But hold with me. So let's say that you grew up with an abusive dad. Okay. You get into a relationship, this guy seems like he's a great guy, and pretty soon he turns abusive.
Okay.
That's like a mirror, right? It's the very first reflection. The universe is trying to create a different outcome. Your soul is trying to create a resolution. through that experience. But what I often find is because we are unconscious, it turns into a re-traumatization. Meaning, during this experience with this abusive person, it just becomes nothing but a repeat. I'm even more traumatized than I was the first time, so on and so forth. It's not until the element of I'm conscious of this pattern comes in that we have the capacity to alter the way that we are dealing with something. So maybe this time I'm walking away. And ironically, that heals everything causally linked to it. Because it's like this time the child gets away. First time she didn't, now she's going to. So this process that I created actually does it the opposite way. If a mirror comes up, instead of creating the resolution here first and hoping that that improves something back here, we actually go all the way back to the root and we improve and alter the original event.
Okay.
And that alters everything causally linked to it this way. So what's incredible is that even if you change nothing, oftentimes after you do this process and you come back, let's say you're in an abusive relationship now, as a mirror of an abusive childhood relationship, that person changes, or an element changes with you not even doing anything. But what also happens is, because of seeing what you needed to resolve this situation, you're now acutely aware of what your needs are, what your wants are, and what changes actually need to be made. So what I watch is a lot of women say in those types of experiences, they'll come out of it and they'll be like, I couldn't do it, but I'm leaving him today.
Okay, and what do you think made the difference? I mean, it's going to the root and just changing it all?
So the real trauma, this is really interesting, but the real trauma that people go through, regardless of what type of trauma it is that they have an unmet need. In this moment I needed to be safe. In this moment I needed to be seen. In this moment I needed to fill in the blank, and it didn't happen. So when you come in, even on a mental level, because your embodiment doesn't know the difference between what is real and what is imagined. It is the same in a quantum universe. So you go back and you actually provide that missing need for the childhood self. And that automatically reflects into the adult relationships. So it's like when you give the child, I see you and I validate you right now. Now the adult self feels validated enough that it can make a real lasting change. It's these unmet needs that are holding us prisoner.
Makes a lot of sense. Now, you were talking about the expansion, that you can't go backwards. Because I was watching, you said that on one of your videos. And I thought that was interesting. You did the diagram, and I thought it was pretty awesome. Because we all think, you know what, I'm doing that again, I'm going backwards, I'm not going forwards, and you're basically saying that's not true.
No, it's impossible.
Okay.
It's vibrationally impossible. The universe doesn't actually repeat patterns. It wants to change the pattern. That's the point. Like, expansion is about, this time, there's this variation. We call that more. If you're just getting the same thing, there's no more. The expansion is, now it's different. That's the whole thing about expansion. So it's looking, when it seems to be repeating a pattern, it is looking to add a variation to that pattern. What happens now, So on a practical 3D level, what happens when the person who's poor ends up with lots of money and feels abundant? What now? I mean, where's the expansion from that place? Does the person want relationships now? Does the person want freedom now? What does this person want now? And desire is basically leading that process.
So, okay, let me just ask you to explain this a little bit, which I think would be helpful with a lot of people, is, so you have a pattern, and we all know some of our patterns, and we might do that in different situations. But let's say that we get some form of healing and some success, right? And we're thinking we're in a good space, and then there you go,
Okay. So, healing in this universe, we have to understand is not linear. And I honestly, if people could just take one thing away from this interview, it's this concept that because we're in a 3D reality where our minds go A, B, C, D, E, F, G, right? You are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 40, 50. So we think in terms of linearity, but it is not the way that the universe functions, and it is sure as hell not the way that healing works because of that. Healing functions more like a spiral. We're sort of like layers of the onion. You can see it that way. So you understand that's the divine shape in this universe is a spiral.
Okay.
Energy moves in a spiral. So, if you're looking at each one of these layers of the spiral like layers of an onion, Now let's pretend that you draw a line from the center of that spiral all the way out. You'll notice that along the line, certain aspects of the spiral will touch the line, and then touch the line again, and then touch the line again. So this is your linear experience of the one pattern you're going through. Say it's an abusive relationship. I want to heal from abusive relationships. So the healing cycle will take you back to it, and back to it, and back to it. And every single time, you will be expanding, see? So it's like maybe this time I heal this layer. Maybe the next time I heal this next layer. And so it's frustrating. I'm just going to be honest with you, because like I would love there to be a magic button that's like, it doesn't exist. Because it's really uncomfortable. But when we don't have that magic button, and trust me, I'll be the first to expose it if I find it, when we don't have that button, what we have to understand is that each time we hit a cycle, which brings us back to even another layer of healing for the same issue, we get even more information, even more healthy, even more.
Why do you think would you say it's the unconscious mind that's doing that, or do you think it's the universe? Both. Okay.
I don't really. So it gets difficult. I mean, we can have that kind of a conversation because it's dissecting the universe into layers. But what gets quite complicated for somebody with a consciousness where mine is right now is differentiating between Source's mind and our mind. Because we like to think that Source itself, God, whatever you want to call it, that it's fully conscious, but it isn't. So if you look at yourself like a tiny duplicate, almost like a fractal, within the greater universe, you have a conscious and subconscious, and so does Source. In fact, your subconscious is Source's subconscious. Your conscious is Source's consciousness. So it's trying to do this so that it knows more. And I mean, it's scary. It's scary for most people to understand that about the universe, because why? We feel more confident when the universe is sort of like a big daddy figure that's taking care of us. We don't want to see ourselves as direct a reflection of the universe as we actually are. So much so that we realize that it's actually us that's responsible for becoming conscious, and that is Source becoming conscious. So it's like your awakening. Source knows just as much as everything in existence knows at this moment. So let's say that there's a shaman who at this moment has completely awoken to the concept of love. That is as much as Source knows about love. So that's why it feels like the universe has more information about love to give you. It's because some other being that was it projecting the physical consciousness realized that.
And are you saying that we're more connected? That we're all connected?
Oh, everyone.
Just kind of putting it all out into...
You can't not be connected. This is why I sort of joke where it's like, are you a spiritual person? It's sort of, I go into hysterics laughing and everyone's like, what's up with Teal? The reason I laugh at that is because it is impossible to not be spiritual. You can't not be spiritual because that's what you are. You are a spiritual being. You are an extension of Source consciousness, regardless of whether you know it or not. And so is the table next to you, and so is the pencil you write on, and so is the food you eat. Absolutely everything is an extension of this. So the physical reality is spirituality. There's nothing actually more spiritual about this conversation than somebody playing basketball. It's just that we're talking about what's beyond this dimension.
Yeah, I like it. I like that. So thank you so much for being with the Worldwide Transformational Summit, and we appreciate your time and all that you've shared with us, and I know that it's going to help a lot of people, so thank you.
Thank you.